Transmissions are one of the most expensive components within a vehicle. Even with a great engine, if you can't put that power to the ground, what point is it? And you could find yourself spending thousands of dollars fixing a vehicle with an absolutely brutal transmission. Well, in today's day and age, would you believe it, there's still manufacturers that just can't get it right. I'm going to give you a list of 5 of the worst transmissions that you can possibly find in the industry so you can avoid them like the plague. Let's get into it now.
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
Let's break this down. The first transmission that I have to include is one of the worst transmissions, not only of today, for many, many years. And sadly, this has plagued the brand Nissan as well for many years. Since 2003, they brought out what they call the continuously variable transmission, which essentially is a Jatco product. And because a sort of partial owner, they feel compelled to actually use that product in a lot of their vehicles. Sadly, unfortunately, many of their vehicles, cars like this small Nissan, as we see right here, we got some basic parts. This is clearly one of their smaller subcompact vehicles, as well as some of their smaller SUVs. They share that CVT transmission and they use it like it's going out of style just because it's cost effective and it just feels cookie cutter. But the unfortunate part is, with a lot of customers complaining with the reliability and the durability, which just is not there, people find themselves just totally fed up with the brand in general. Sure, while they have some great features like that and pure drive, and of course in this little Sentra you get cars like this that are very economical to drive when they're not braking and when the transmission's not blowing, people that typically find themselves changing the oil more frequently find themselves with a little more luck and a little more success. However, the transmission is inherently fragile, weak, and a high probability of catastrophic failure. And sadly, you could be driving down the road, you could smell musty smoke coming out of the cabin, you could see smoke, you can hear squealing and whining noises, you could feel this surge, or you put the throttle down and it just delays and then goes. There's a whole host of different symptoms and scenarios that you can experience when you're driving a late model Nissan product with the continuously variable transmission. But the unfortunate reality is, if you're one of the recipients of a used Nissan product that's carrying that CVT, there's a very, very high probability that you probably won't be able to repair it. You probably won't be able to just salvage the failure. You're likely just going to have to replace that transmission outright, and that could cost you anywhere from $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, which is pretty much the cost of a replacement engine in one of these smaller Nissan products. Clearly a very expensive failure, and clearly not a level of reliability that I would trust or advise to anybody. So if you're looking at a used Nissan, maybe look at something that's already been rebuilt, replaced, or the price is right so you can take that into account, because the CVT transmission isn't a matter of if, it's more like a matter of when. Another one of the worst transmissions you'll find anywhere is what's under the hood or potentially underneath this vehicle here and many other GM products, full-size pickup trucks. And they actually co-conspired with Ford, and they built this 10-speed automatic transmission that was manufactured and designed since 2017 onwards. This 10-speed, called the 10R80, is an automatic transmission that a lot of people are complaining about these days. It's finally making the radar where people are complaining about slipping, put it in gear and it's waiting, and then it goes, or it's juddering at low speed, or at high speed it's kind of kicking and bucking, and it's just not a real smooth operator. As a matter of fact, it made the radar for a lot of customers to be able to take this into the dealership, get it serviced, and even GM warranted that, said, look, we'll change the fluid for you, no problem. But at the end of the day, it feels like one of those real fragile automatic transmissions, and we know that Chevy, GM, and Ford have all struggled with automatic transmission issues time and time again, and this is just yet another reinforcement. And for those that say, hey, I've got a 10-speed and it's been fine, I'll just say, if you ever get a chance to drive a ZF automatic transmission, then you'll realize what a quality automatic transmission is versus one of these, which is up to hauling duty at times. But again, there's way too many customers with complaints of slipping, all kinds of weird noises, bucking, and of course just surging. It's just not a great transmission, and quite frankly, anytime you get two of the worst creating some of their best products, Ford and GM, you're likely to have a problem. And that's exactly what we have right here in the 2017 onwards 10R80 automatic transmission right here. And so with all this transmission talk, how do you know whether you've got a bad transmission going on? Well, let's start with manual, CVT, and automatic. Those are the typical, as well as double clutch. A manual gearbox, often when you go to shift into the next gear, you'll get a crunch. If you have that, either you've got a couple of things typically going on: a problem with the clutch itself, maybe it's not engaging or disengaging enough, or you could have bad synchronizers in the gearbox. If you've been playing rough with the transmission, that could be a sign. If you're getting crunching between shifts, that could in fact be synchronizers, and you may need to rebuild part of that transmission. If you're dealing with a CVT continuously variable transmission, some of the symptoms there are delays, excess heat. You could get surging, you could get whining, scraping, dragging noises coming from under the hood. And CVTs often give you, if it's slipping, you'll know. That's a bad sign. As well, on top of that, if you're talking about the torque converter auto transmission, you know, often some of the initial signs are delays, or put your foot down and it doesn't shift, or it shifts really hard. It waits and then bang, and it's a very abrupt shift. That could be a common sign. Or it just doesn't shift at all. Or you're starting up the vehicle, you drive it away in first gear, and then you decide to pull up, stop, and throw it in reverse, and then there's an extended period of time where the vehicle does not engage. That could be a serious problem with your transmission. If you're finding that there's too much delay, not enough response to throttle input, what you should have is a torque converter picking up that vehicle and getting the vehicle moving down the road. And if the acceleration and the throttle input does not initiate the movement, then you might have some problems with either your torque converter or your automatic transmission. Hope that helps, gives you a little bit of insight. Always, bad noises, bad delays, and not moving down the road are all bad signs of bad transmissions. Now you can make an argument for all these unreliable vehicles like this Hyundai junk here, this Range Rover, highly complex and unreliable, as well as that Nissan right here that's clearly leaking a whole lot of fluid underneath. That's not a good scene. But no, this is the vehicle that we're talking about with the worst transmission, or at least on the list of the worst transmissions ever found. And now we know that Ford has never been accused of being the most reliable. They've never been accused of making the best quality products. Found on Road Dead, ever hear that one before? Yes, this is a Ford. And this is unfortunately on the list of some of the worst transmissions you'll ever find. The early generations, what we're looking at here, are a Ford Focus. Clearly not very well looked after, very basic parts. Look, things fall off, not well made. Of course, yay, they even get a sunroof on top. That's pretty fancy. And they get great wheels and a little wing on the back. But this Focus, as we're looking at right here, the SE Flex Fuel, is a literal catastrophe as we're looking right in front of us here. This does carry one of the worst transmissions ever known to automotive history. And now what we have is a Getrag transmission, or at least they've got in joint or got in bed together with Ford and created a product called a Power Shift transmission. It's a dual clutch automatic, essentially. It alternates gears and gear sets. It's a dry clutch setup. The first generation was a 6-speed automatic, absolutely horrendous. The later version, we're not sure who exactly created that, but it was a wet clutch system, slightly improved. But basically, you're looking at transmissions built anywhere from 2008 to 2019, include some form of the Power Shift transmission. Absolutely junk. It's bad enough that you have engines that burn oil, leak coolant, leak oil, but you also have transmissions here that buck and lurch and squeal and howl and slip, and they don't actually get going when they should. And a lot of people complain about the drivability, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. As these vehicles, the clutches start to heat up, they start to cook, and you get even more slipping and more problems. The Power Shift transmission is what I call it. It's just another cherry on the proverbial cake. Ignition keys that don't come out of the ignition, water pump issues, oil leaks, and the whole gambit. So sorry, Ford, another miss for you. It was the Power Shift, then the Power Stroke, and now the Power Boost. Something about power, not so powerful, is it? The next one on our list is a combination of GM, Chevy, as well as Cadillac, and have some of the worst transmissions ever known to mankind. With some of these 2015 to 2019 vehicles full size by that manufacturer in GM, there's enough transmissions blowing to impress Liberace. So there's an alleged lawsuit now which impacts about 200,000 vehicles from 2015 to about 2019 that carry two distinct transmissions. And customers complain of wobbling, shaking, hesitation, surging, and obviously just major delays in putting your foot down to the time you actually move. All kinds of chaotic maneuvers, and people are getting very upset with it. GM's looking into this, and unfortunately, there's so many of these vehicles on the road that we're seeing these recalls hit widespread. The two transmissions in question that we're talking about are the 8L45 and the 8L90 transmissions. And sadly, it's these 8-speed automatic transmissions that are causing a whole host of issues. If you've got one of those transmissions, check out National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. Look for recalls under your VIN, pull it up, and you can see whether your vehicle is impacted by this recall. But either way, the 8-speed automatic transmission in many of the full-size pickup trucks by GM, Chevy, Cadillac are the butt of a lot of jokes. Right here is one of the next worst automatic transmissions. They just don't last. And I'll give you a story. But first of all, why would you ever want to tow anything with this vehicle, especially knowing that that transmission will not hold up? And the worst part is, from my experience, Dodge, Chrysler, products, Jeep, Stellantis now have never been that great of quality. There have always been problems with them, and you're guaranteed to get a short life out of them. Sure, you can run them hard, put them away wet, and they might get some miles on them, but that's only because you're constantly putting on nickel and dime Band-Aid style parts. But these vehicles are never made to last a long time. They were never made to outlast products from Toyota or Honda. I mean, just look right here. You've got rusting under the paint. This is not even that old of a vehicle. By Dodge with their fancy new decal, very simple headlights. Of course, you do get alloy wheels on here. Nice little rail guards along here. And people like these vehicles. They can throw little Johnny and little Susie in there, the dog, the cat, their camping gear, and chuck it all in there. And it's a practical vehicle. But there's a lot of practical vehicles. Toyota, Honda makes practical vehicles too. But these here are not well made, and it's because of that transmission, which we know is one of the weakest in the industry. We know from back since 1988 till almost present, there's a transmission called the Ultra Drive transmission that these manufacturers were actually creating. Now, this particular unit that we talked about, and I know somebody specifically who had a Grand Voyager, which carried a 3.3 liter V6, and it had the 4-speed automatic, the Ultra Drive that we're talking about, the 41TE, which stands for Transverse Electronique, or electronic, and there's their fun, frivolous little name for that transmission. But it's not very fun when you're sitting in the service and parts department and they send you the bill, slide that across the table, and tell you that you're about to have to pay them about $3,800 for a new transmission because yours just blew. And let me tell you, I've got a story for sure. I know somebody specifically who had a late model Grand Voyager, and it was similar to the previous generation to this with the 3.3 and of course that 4-speed automatic transmission. And he was an older gentleman. He took care of it, he babied it, he warmed it up, he did the maintenance, checked the fluids, he did everything by the book and then some. And yet he sustained a catastrophic failure. He was just using his vehicle, had moderate miles on it, only had about 60 or 70,000 kilometers, which is about 40 or 50,000 miles on it. And then all of a sudden he goes and cranks it, bang! His vehicle, he tried to put it in gear, but he's an older gentleman, so he's not looking around. He's not too mechanically inclined. He called me up and I looked underneath here and I saw a catastrophic failure right in there. That's right, the vehicle pretty much needed a diaper. Why? Because it blew a catastrophic hole in the case of the transmission. That's right, all the fluid was on the ground and there was a big hole in the bottom of the case and the vehicle wouldn't move. You put in gear, and this was with low kilometers. I had an older car too from the same brand. Remember the old Daytonas? Similar issues. Transmission blew out while I was driving down the freeway, just blew itself out and lost all of its oil. The worst part is when I called up the transmission repair shop locally here, I told him what I had, the year, the make, the model, and all of that. His first point was, yeah, we see those all the time. He said there's some kind of retainer, it starts to back itself out and on this shaft and it starts to eat away at the case and all of a sudden bang, it blows out. And apparently this is something that he saw over and over and over again, and we sustain the same issue. So it's almost like you need to carry around a geriatric diaper and wrap it under the bottom side of your transmission should you sustain a failure, because nobody wants to see that big puddle of oil all over the road. So unfortunately, anything up to and including at least the 2012 and 13 are going to likely be one of the list of some of the most hated and decrepit vehicles from Dodge Caravans with that 4-speed automatic transmission. Fortunately, the later 6-speeds were a little bit better. They were known to be slightly more reliable, less likely to go catastrophic failure. But unfortunately, this 5th generation Caravan right here has some of the worst transmissions, particularly in base trim. And when I see people put a trailer hitch on here and tow their boat or their trailer to the lake with one of these vehicles, I just flinch and can't help but think, uh-oh, that's a ticking time bomb. And naturally, with all of that said, right there, you want to worry about transmissions. How about engines? There are still some really, really bad engines on the market. You're going to want to check that out. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. See you real soon. Bye-bye.